The 13th tenet of Jewish belief is resurrection. And that's where it all culminates. That after existence exists for so many years, and people are born and people die, and people succeed in their objective of their existence because they lived within a certain protocol which God set for them, meaning they were able to invest their physical lives as a means, not an end, to bring about the will of God. That person ultimately will merit eternity, both the physical and the spiritual. So therefore, after the person dies, and it's time for a resurrection, he will be resurrected, and the soul will be reinfused into that body. The person doesn't merit resurrection, that person will not be part of eternity, and that person will go to the oblivion. That person's soul will no longer exist. But the ultimate is, which is the ultimate objective of creation, that man should be a beneficiary of his own choices. And ultimately, that can only come about only after resurrection, because as we mentioned, that because Adam had eaten of the tree of knowledge and he putrefied his physicality, and the challenge is a much more serious challenge because of that evil, which was part and parcel of the physicality of the person. Even though he may succeed, that despite that handicap, spiritual handicap, that body cannot be part of eternity because it has that evil element within it. It has to be somehow expunged from it. And the expungement process is, person dies, decomposes. When the person will be resurrected, that pure matter will become part of that new physical body. The soul being reinfused in that body will spiritualize the body based on its accomplishments during its lifetime. But it's interesting. Until the time of resurrection, where's the soul? Where's the soul? The soul is placed in a it's referred to as the soul world. And what does it do in the soul world? It basks in God's radiance. And the soul, based on its accomplishments, continuously advances and expands. Eventually, when that soul will be reinfused in the body, it's going to be a different dimension of soul due to that exposure of the soul world, that it was exposed and it basked in the radiance of God. So the body now, when it will be reinfused with that soul, it'll be spiritualized beyond initially at the time that it passed away, that the person passed away. Because the soul itself is so overwhelmingly radiating holiness, the body, although it's physical, will be spiritualized and it will take on a total physical, spiritual dimension. I mentioned, which he mentions later, that where's the soul located in a human being? The soul, although at the time of creation, it says God blew a soul of life into his nostrils, the soul does not exist within the person. The soul hovers above the person's head. Why? Pre-sin of Adam, the body being an appropriate repository, receptacle for the soul was within the body. When Adam ate of the tree of knowledge, the body was no longer qualified because of the level of putrefaction. The soul detached itself from the body and is only connected above the head. So Adam pre-sin, where was the soul within his body? Post-sin, it was outside of his body. Moshe Rabbeinu, on the other hand, because he had spiritualized his physicality to such a degree, Moshe Rabbeinu was the only human being whose soul was within his body, not outside of his body. At the end of time, when the body will be resurrected and that soul will be infused in the body, that body's made of pure matter. That body will be spiritualized due to the overwhelming radiance and holiness of that soul. Now that body's soul now can actually bask even the physicality in God's presence, based on what it accomplished during its lifetime. I'd once mentioned the name of the Or HaChaim HaKodesh. Or HaChaim HaKodesh is a semi-Kabbalistic commentary on the Torah. The human being is made of three components. The one component is called nefesh, that's the life source. The second component is called the spirit, which is called ruach. The third component is called neshama. And each one's linked to the other. The part of the human being which exists purely in this world is the nefesh. That's the life source. The spirit that links the life source to the soul, that bridges the two. Now, so the soul is a key component in the person. That's the ultimate objective, to give a person a connection to eternity. Because otherwise, God could have created a human being as an intellectual animal. And just as the animal, when it dies, that's where it ends. This person, if he wouldn't have a soul, when he dies, it comes to an end. But since God wanted to give man the opportunity to be part of eternity, he endowed him with a spiritual component called soul. And if he addresses that soul properly, he becomes part of eternity due to the soul. It's not the life source. It's not the spirit. Those only facilitate the ability and create the context that soul is able to make choices and advance itself. Okay? What happens if a person becomes so evil, as we said now, after the sin of Adam, the soul is no longer within the body, it's on top, it hovers on top of the head. That's where it hovers. And that's sufficient to give the body a connection to the soul. What happens if the whole body becomes so evil due to man's choices? Then the soul detaches itself totally from the body. And that person only lives with a life source and a spirit. The soul is no longer associated with that person. Because since the person, that receptacle, has become so evil and so putrefied, it's inappropriate even for the soul to be associated with, even above the body. And it totally detaches itself. So a human being could live with a life source and a spirit, no soul. Sometimes there's an expression in English, he's so evil, he lives as if he has no soul. And people, God forbid, they could actually fall to a level that their physicality and whatever they represent is so negative and so despised by God, the soul will not associate with that entity called that, whoever that human being is, and it detaches itself. That person functions and lives without a soul. A person can live without a soul. With this, as long as the life source is there and the spirit, person functions. And the person himself doesn't even realize that he no longer has a soul. Because the soul only gives him those spiritual opportunities to advance himself to many levels which go outside of this existence, which allows him to be part of eternity. Rambam writes in the laws of Deos, laws of understanding of the makeup and the objective of a Jew, that he says, just as, and the Rambam is writing as a doctor, as a medical doctor, just as a person is able to be deficient chemically, nutrition-wise, that the body itself malfunctions in the physical sense, And what's beneficial to the body, to the physicality, the person despises and rejects. And what's detrimental to the human being's physicality, he craves that. And he gives an example. He says a person, due to a chemical misfunction or dysfunction, a person can eat something sweet and he cannot tolerate it. He tastes it as bitter. And something bitter tastes sweet. He says, just as the body is able to have this deficiency, which everything else is distorted because of the malfunction of the body, you can have a malfunction of the soul. That's something which the person should gravitate to, or at least minimally be neutral to. He cannot tolerate anything that's associated with spirituality. Even though you may explain it to him, the objective, purpose, innateness, he sees it as dread. And he runs from it like from the devil. And he does whatever he can to undermine it, that it shouldn't be. That's due to what? The sickness of the soul. The man has a sick soul. And he says, that's why when we make prayer for a person, we say, Refuas ha-nefesh, Refuas ha-guf. His soul, his life source should be healed, and his physicality should be healed. It's a double level of what? Of recovery from illness. The body has to recover, and the life source has to recover. But the life source is not the neshama. Life source is the full function of the person. The soul is only to link it to eternity. So we're saying that even if though the person may not have a soul because he's so evil, and the soul cannot be associated with that body, but he will be fully functional due to that life source. But that life source is so infected with spiritual impurity, it processes things not in a proper context. Holy is profane, and profane is holy to this person. That's the way it is. You know, we speak about self-hating Jews. No, you don't have to look for anti-Semites, not to tolerate Jews. The Jews who cannot tolerate Jews. Although the person says, although we're from the same background, we have the same DNA, well, everything is proven. If the Jew, if he has any sense that this Jew represents what the Jewish people are about, he will not tolerate it. He cannot live with it and coincide with it. He'll do whatever he can, either to detach himself or to uproot it and destroy it. It was a known fact. The Reform movement, which was founded initially in Germany and then Hungary, because they were more enlightened, so to say, the Jewish community of Germany, of Frankfurt, was recognized by the German government, and they had their own autonomy. And they could legislate laws and dictate rules and tax the community, and the Orthodox were bound to pay taxes. And if you violate any of the protocols of that Reformed community, the government would imprison you. Give you some examples. They closed down all the mikvahs, the mikvahs in Germany, in Frankfurt. For a woman to be able to go what they used to call a ritualarium, to immerse herself, to achieve spiritual purity, they shut down every mikvah. There was no mikvah. They forbade circumcision. They did not want Jews to have themselves circumcised. This is how they couldn't tolerate it whatsoever. And if you circumcise your child, you're subject to imprisonment. If you wanted to circumcise yourselves in that time, you had to leave Frankfurt, go to some village, and have yourself circumcised under QT. Because it would ever be found that you actually went against what was legislated by the Reformed community, you'd be put in prison. The Orthodox community had to pay taxes to the Reformed community, although all the laws that they legislated were contrary to Torah Judaism, to Orthodoxy. Didn't make a difference. Does it make sense? We say, live and let live. You want to be that, I'll be this. They couldn't tolerate it. no mikveh, no circumcision. We have the organ in the temple, like you have an organ in the church. There was such a draw towards Christianity, and that's why within a 30-year period, from 1820 to 1850, 50% of the Jews in Frankfurt converted to Christianity. Could you imagine? It's not to be believed. You want to be an irreligious Jew, be a neutral Jew, but to be so opposed to it that you don't want to be associated with it, to convert, is something you have to really be, as they say, malfunctional as a spiritual person. And you see the positive is the negative is the positive. That's the way that person is processing it. But you realize that kind of person, when it comes to the time of resurrection, there's no point in resurrecting that person. Because the whole idea is the soul is reinserted in the body and it spiritualizes the body. This person's soul is not offering much. Because even when he was alive, the soul became non-functional. It was removed from him and put somewhere else. And the man only functioned as a life source together with a spirit. There was no soul within the person. So what is the concept of Tchias HaMesim, resurrection? There's a Minchas. The Minchas tells us that there were these two people, they were partners in crime. One person was an amputee, he had no legs. And the other person was blind, couldn't see. They decided they want to steal fruit from the king's orchard, the orchard of the king. But there was a problem. The person who had no feet, he couldn't go steal fruit from the orchard. The man who was blind, he couldn't see where he was going. So they decided between the two of them, the person who has no legs will sit on the shoulders of the person who's blind, and the person who's blind will carry the person without legs to wherever the person who could see, who's the amputee, to the location which he directs him to go. So what do? They go, and the person who's the amputee is fully functional mentally, visually speaking, and he directs the blind person to take him to the orchard. They go and they steal the fruit, and they divide the fruit, what we call the loot, between the two of them. Okay? Word went out that fruit was stolen from the king's orchard. So what did these two go? And they were suspect that they did it. So they go to the person without the legs. They say, we suspect you stole fruit from the king's orchard. He says, how could I steal fruit? I can't walk. I have no legs. How could I go into the king's orchard? There's no way I'm even able to get there. They go to the blind man, and they say to the blind man, we understand you actually participated in stealing fruit from the king's orchard. How is that possible? I'm not able to see. How do we even get there? I don't even know where it is. So the investigative team says, we understand. The king knew exactly how this happened. So what did they do? They took the man without the legs, put him on the shoulders of the blind man, and they started to beat them simultaneously. The one without legs and the one who was blind. What happens? The physicality of the person, without the physicality, you can't initiate good or evil. You're not functional without a body. The soul without a body is not functional. But the body without the soul is functional. Right? The body without the soul is also not functional. The person is not alive. What did God do? He infused the body with the soul. So the body and soul chose to do the right thing, which is against the grain. Because we're inclined to negative. As much as the soul was involved in the process of doing the right thing, the body was no less involved. So just as the soul has to be rewarded, the body has to be rewarded. Because it's a partner in doing the right thing. However, there's a problem. Ultimately, the body will be rewarded. But what's the ultimate reward? To bask in God's radiance. But because the body itself is tainted with the evil of the tree of knowledge, at this stage, the body's not ready to be able to be exposed to that level of holiness, because it's a relation with God. And as long as you possess that evil, God wants nothing to do with that evil. So what does Hashem say? The soul will radiate, will sit and benefit from God's radiance until God's ready to resurrect the body. Because when the body be resurrected, the body will no longer contain that evil, because the body will decompose. Now, when we join the two together, they are partners in doing the will of God. The soul in one aspect, and the body being the facilitator, to do it. So therefore, resurrection is a fundamental reward and punishment. The body is no less of reward as much as the soul. As a result of that, the soul itself, when it's reinserted, reinfused in the body and soul glow as one entity. You can't discern between the physicality and the soul, the spirituality of the soul. That's the understanding of resurrection. So resurrection, the 12th tenet of Judaism, Jewish belief, is the coming of Mashiach. The 11th tenet is reward and punishment. God rewards those who are deserving of reward and punishes those who are deserving of punishment. Then Bias Mashiach, coming of Mashiach, which is the ultimate bringing the world to a state of completion, perfection. And then the 13th is resurrection. That those who no longer here, they will be resurrected, because otherwise it's contrary to the concept of reward and punishment, because the body deserves no less than the soul itself. We find the soul was created as a separate entity, and the body was created as an entity. Then they were united. Why? Because each one has the ability to influence the other. If they're created as one entity, that means they function initially as one. So the whole power struggle, you don't have two entities which are contrary to one another. They were created together. Here they were created independently. Now two opposing forces are connected. The question of who wins the tug of war. The soul, and the soul ultimately will spiritualize the body, or the body will overwhelm the soul, and the soul will be driven out of the body. And the person ultimately will remain as that person without a soul, only with a life source and the spirit. I'll tell you, in today's society especially, many people, unfortunately, in terms of their behavior, in terms of the value of existence, they don't display anything more than body and spirit. Soul, you don't see soul. Soul represents a purity, fundamental values. The society that we live in today, many of those fundamentals which were once fundamental, even among non-Jews, you don't see it. You don't find it. People just float through life, and whatever they pick up, they pick up. So if there's a lot of corrupted values out there, warped values, distortions of truth. That's where people go. Okay, we're going to stop here. I'm open for just